Hello and welcome to Uisce Matters. I'm Orlaith Blaney, and in this podcast series, we'll explore how Uisce Éireann is shaping the future of water, from safeguarding public health and protecting the environment to building the infrastructure that supports Ireland's economic growth. Today's guest is Uisce Éireann CEO Niall Gleeson. You're very welcome, Niall.
Thanks, Orla. It's great to be here.
We're going to kick off with a little bit of an insight into how you got your interest in engineering.
Yeah, I suppose it goes back to my grandfather, who has passed away quite a long time ago. But he was, into ham radio, into TV when it was just coming into Ireland. And I used to really love going down to visit him. And he had this attic with model railway and all this kind of stuff. So he gave me the interest in engineering in the first place. I loved taking things apart. I never managed to put a lot of them back together again properly. But that was the original interest. So I think from the age of about 13, I kind of wanted to be an engineer and worked in school towards getting into engineering as a degree,
So fixing problems, I guess.
Yeah, that's what fixing things. And my own father was, his toolkit consisted of a bent screwdriver and a rusty hammer. So he had no mechanical aptitude whatsoever. My mother was pretty good, but yeah, so I had to do a lot of the stuff, the DIY stuff around the house and I enjoyed doing all that kind of stuff.
Tell me about, the decision then to kind of make it a career and, assessing maybe your career path as you were leaving school and thinking about courses and...
Yeah, like I said, I kind of always thought engineering was a good subject, a good degree to get into. So I picked, engineering workshop and, maths and applied maths, those kind of subjects in school. I was reasonably good at them. I'm not a brilliant mathematician, but got by well enough to get through. Engineering is a tough degree. By third year, I was kind of going, was this really the right choice? But once you get over that hump, I think fourth year, you kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel and you're out. And it really does build your critical reasoning. It's a great degree for analysis and problem solving, as you say,
So your first job, talk to me about your first job.
Yeah, I had a couple of jobs in Ireland, in Limerick and Tipperary Town. I was working in a factory down there. But my first real job was with General Electric. Back in the late 80s, Ireland was a fairly depressed economy. We were hired by General Electric because Irish engineers were cheap compared to the Americans. So every year they would take about 20 to 25 engineers out of Ireland, bring us over to Schenectady in New York, which was the General Electric headquarters at the time. And, we came from, a fairly poverty-stricken country, landed in America, given a rental car between two of us, an apartment to share, per diem, and the salary was pretty good. So, and they trained us in 6 months of classroom training and then 6 months of on the job training, all around America.
And what kind of training is involved in getting geared up?
So we were being trained to be commissioning engineers for gas turbines. So these are big machines that generate electricity typically around, and they can be very large. They could be supplying power for a huge city, or you could be out in the jungle of Borneo, which is where one place I ended up supplying electricity to a new town in essentially in the jungle. So a very varied career,
adventurous.
Really interesting. Yeah, no, it was great. And at the time, my daughter just came back from touring Southeast Asia on a package tour kind of thing.
Yeah.
But at the time, people didn't go to Thailand or Indonesia or these kind of places. Yes. It was quite unusual, and they weren't used to foreigners being there either.
And after that, General Electric period, where to next?
Yeah, so myself and my wife, we met while I was with General Electric. She was with one of the airlines and could travel cheaply, so she came to meet me in a lot of places, and then eventually we worked together. But once we had our first child, moving from, I was doing 6 months assignments and we had a couple of hold alls and we'd move from one spot to the other. When you have your first child, you suddenly need a 40-foot container to carry all the gear. So we decided this career wasn't going to last. So I'd been looking around. I came back to Ireland. Initially came back and worked in Guinness's
Okay.
They were building the storehouse at the time, so I was involved in that project. But then I joined Shanahan Engineering, which was an Irish company, an Irish kind of startup family business, but that was supplying into the likes of General Electric and Siemens and Mitsubishi and these guys in the same business I'd been in, but based in Dublin. So I was able to live in Dublin, but we travelled all the time. Like we'd very little, 5% of our business was in Ireland. All of it was international again.
And in one of your roles, you worked on the Uisce, which many listeners will know and love for its great service. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I moved from Shanahan's to Alstom, Ireland. So and it was an interesting shift because I'd moved from totally international work to only Irish work. I was the country manager for Alstom in Ireland. So we had their energy business and the transport business, and I had never been involved in transport before. So, and moving from one industry to another can be tricky, energy. And the rail guys, if you weren't born on a rail car, they didn't want to talk to you, kind of thing, But eventually I got them around to listen to me and talking to me. But yeah, really interesting. Running a public transport system is quite different to say power delivery or energy delivery, because energy, you tend to be remote. People don't really think about the light switch going on and off and where the electricity comes from. But everyone has an opinion on public transport. And the Uisce, everyone has an opinion on, why didn't you send it down this street? Why doesn't it do this? Why isn't it longer? Why isn't it shorter? Why isn't there more of them? So everyone has thoughts around public transport.
It's a great service and a great system. I know it probably took a long time from fruition to actually getting it up and running.
Yeah. And it was really interesting. Like, I was heavily involved. At the early days, it was other people, but heavily involved in the upgrades of the new lines. And the joining of the lines was a big project that I pushed very hard with government, because if you remember, it was just after the Celtic Tiger had collapsed and nothing was being built. The Metro North had collapsed, but the Cross City one was affordable at the time, and that went ahead. And we supplied the new 50-metre trams that were required to deliver the capacity. And that was I had to work with La Rochelle in France. That's where the trams are manufactured. And with the Irish engineers to come up with a tram, because Alstom hadn't produced a 50-metre tram up to that point. It's quite unusual,
So, Niall, after leaving the trials and tribulations of the Uisce, Uisce Éireann was on your next step.
Yeah, I did a couple of other jobs. I was actually working in Hong Kong when I was contacted about the Uisce Éireann job. Really fascinated me. There was the birth of Uisce Éireann was a challenge with the billing and the water charges issues. But, I saw well beyond that. That wasn't the thing I was worried about. It was much more about rebuilding the infrastructure, getting, what was required to bring the Irish water infrastructure from pretty much a Victorian system up to modern day standards, and all the challenges around that. From an engineering point of view, that was fascinating. So a really interesting challenge there.
And how would you describe, I guess, what Uisce Éireann is, like our role, our responsibilities?
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people would have said, look, the 31 local authorities that were delivering water services were doing fine, and why change it? But, I think with the standards that are coming out of Europe, the new requirements that are being delivered, and, 31 local authorities, it's very hard to create a critical mass of real knowledge and real expertise. So we work as a national organisation, and we have national expertise and national standards and ways of working, but we deliver locally, and we still have local teams who are very involved, and our teams work, the national teams or central teams work very well with us. So I think a centrally managed organisation for water service is crucial in today's world, because you really have to have that expertise to deliver the standards that are required today.
So we had 31 individual local authorities running water services in each of their particular areas around the country. What's the upside now in terms of having that strategic view of the country in relation to water and how and where we invest?
Yeah, well, so we have a national view. There's two things, I suppose. One is when you were with the local authorities, water services may be the poor cousin, because there's roads, there's housing. Ribbon cutting on some of our projects is tricky because we bury the best stuff, and quite often you're just opening a small shed in a field because everything else is underground. So not as glamorous and not as exciting. So I think they didn't get the funding they needed. Now we can gather up all the information. We go in very credibly to government, and we recently got 12 billion allocated capital funds for the next 5 years, which is a huge achievement. But we've been able to do that because we have the expertise and the knowledge to say, actually, this all needs to be done, and here's the reasons why. So I don't think that could have been achieved when you had 31 individual local authorities. But then again, the second part is we bring those skills. We have process optimization teams that go from plant to plant and county to county, helping staff improve the operation. They're working really well with the local caretakers who have the history and the knowledge of how the water in that area works, and our process ops teams have the sort of latest scientific tools and knowledge that we can improve those. So working together, it's working really well and improving things vastly.
Often people get, I suppose, not a good, clear understanding of what's involved in the amount of infrastructure that Uisce Éireann are accountable and responsible for. Talk to me a little bit about the infrastructure. What have we got out there in terms of running water and wastewater services?
Yeah, Ireland is quite unique because of our spatial planning has not been good, and our geology doesn't lend itself to long runs of pipe. So we've a lot of small plants dotted around the country, especially in the more remote areas. So we have around 8,000 assets, I suppose you'd call it. That's everything from the Uisce plant to small pumping stations in the west of Ireland that might be supplying 20 customers at the end of a line, you know. So it's a vast network and estate that we have to manage.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the infrastructure itself, we have water treatment plants, we have wastewater treatment plants, we have reservoirs. What else is in the mix that we manage and look after?
Yeah. Well, one unique way of looking at it, sometimes I say we are the biggest beverage production and distribution business in the country, and we're the biggest waste collection and recycling business in the country by a country mile. There's no one comes close to us. So again, that's a vast estate to manage. And like I said, you've got operations like Uisce that are 24/7. The operators are all around the clock. And then you have very remote sites where operators might only drop in once every second day or so. So managing that kind of estate is it gives very unique challenges.
And what about upgrading them? So it's one thing to build them and have them on site. And we've got lots of new water treatment plants and infrastructure, wastewater treatment plants, like in Cork Harbour, upgrading Rings End. What is involved in maintaining those assets in terms of work?
Yeah, and it's, you know, quite often we love building the new stuff, chasing the shiny things, and you know, that's really nice. But actually capital maintenance that you brought up there is crucially important to keeping the existing assets in good condition. And that has, you know, what we've seen over the years, that has been fallen into, you know, not disrepair, but it hasn't been maybe as well managed as it could have been. So there's a lot of catch-up work in capital maintenance all around the country.
Niall, you mentioned there earlier on about the 12.3, so the 10.3 billion in capital expenditure that we have been given to move on in terms of the infrastructure. But I guess I'm curious about the role of the regulation. So we have an environmental regulator, an economic regulator. How key is that for us in terms of ensuring that we comply with the targets been set by our regulators?
Yeah. Look, we're the national authority for water service. So inbuilt in us is a desire to do well. But I think the regulators do just keep us on the right track and make sure that, you know, when you're, say for the environmental regulator, when there's new regulations coming in from Europe, that we work together to define those regulations and how we will comply with them. So we work very closely with the EPA. I think we have a good relationship. They've been critical of us over the time, and rightly so. Our equipment and our plants haven't been up to scratch, but we've made big improvements. And in their annual reports, they do recognise those improvements over time. So that's a really good relationship with the EPA. They can be tough at times, but you know, it works well. The economic regulation is probably trickier for people to understand because we basically get funding from the government, and then we take that allocation and we go to the regulator, say, here's how we're going to spend that money. We're going to spend it on this, that, and the other, and they will analyse where we're going to distribute that spend, and they'll agree, and they'll set maybe higher targets, and they'll say, well, we think you can do better here, and add a bit more. So they'll manage us over the next 5 years to ensure that we deliver what we said we would deliver.
I guess on the environmental side, you know, protecting public health. So we have a couple of roles: protecting public health and making sure our water is safe to drink, making sure that the environment is protected. And what are the EPA really focused on in measuring? What kind of targets are they really focused in on? So
drinking water is obviously our priority, is safe drinking water for everybody in the country. So one thing I would say is that we would have areas that are not compliant, but if you've got a boil water notice, that means we're monitoring. So our monitoring of the drinking water safety has improved vastly. So when you see more incidents and more issues, it means that we're catching more stuff because we're checking more. So that's a big area of improvement. I think it's, you know, there's the biological side of stuff. There's the bugs, the Cryptosporidium. We saw those kind of incidents years ago. We've done an awful lot better in those areas. And then we also look at mineral content, and you know, we've a new issue coming through, we think, due to climate change of more manganese in the water, and we're having to treat for that where we hadn't had to treat for that before. So it's those kind of, you know, it's continuously monitoring the water quality and making sure that we're keeping to the standards.
We've talked about Irish regulation, but we also know that there's European legislation coming now to increase the standards even further. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, Irish legislation and regulation has always come from Europe, or has since we've joined. So, but those regulations, those standards are increasing all the time. And what I find sometimes is that we're only, because of our infrastructure, because it hasn't been invested in for years, we're only coming up to sort of the latest standards, and then we're getting new standards from Europe. So it's a continuous improvement process that we have to do to the plants. We might bring up a plant up to standard, and then new regulations will come in, which means more capital investment. So, when people ask me sometimes, when are you going to stop investing? When do we have to stop giving you money? And unfortunately, it's never. We will be continuously upgrading the plant and equipment over the years, and the budget for water is going to be big forever, I suspect.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about water policy. So we obviously have a very good view of the infrastructure, but tell us about the role of the government in setting out water policy.
So again, a lot of that would come from Europe. So it's what we're trying to do is get the balance right between, as you said, drinking water quality, environmental impact, and growth. So the state needs more industry, needs FDI, foreign direct investment, and it needs housing growth as well. We've seen that.
Niall, a lot of things in the leadership world about leading a company with purpose and being committed to something, I guess, beyond the pipes and the money. Talk to us a little bit about Uisce Éireann's purpose.
Yeah, so our purpose is to deliver for customers and communities. I mean, to me, that's one of the big advantages we have is we are delivering water services, and water is crucial to everybody. So it's a really worthy business to be in. We're not making widgets in a factory. We're not facilitating the uploading of cat videos to YouTube. So it's a great place to work. And I think people, when they do deliver those services, it's a worthy cause,
I certainly feel, when you come into work every day that, we talk a lot about our infrastructure, the pipes, the money, but actually the difference we make on the ground when we connect new homes, when we enable a business to increase its capacity for wastewater and they can now employ more people and we can have more exports. That's a really powerful place to be in a role and a job. And I think that whole delivering water services piece is so critical and also enabling our communities to thrive and for us to assist in that. Yeah. Do you think Irish people take water for granted?
Yeah, look, what we do find is when people do take it for granted until it's not there, and then people scream very loudly, because as soon as you lose water, your house, you have a small tank in the attic which maybe gets you through a day, but if it's longer than that, you can't wash your food, you can't cook, everything stops without water. So people do take it for granted because when you turn on the tap, it's 99% of the time it's there. But we do need to get people to appreciate water more in this country, I think, because it falls from the sky and because the country is generally quite wet. I just came back from Greece and it hadn't rained there for months and months. So the taxi driver was quite jealous that I was going back to the rain, So it's interesting, but we really need to help people appreciate, because it's the treated water that comes out of your tap. I think people don't really get a concept of how much effort goes into taking that rainwater and delivering to your tap. There's a whole lot of processes. There's a huge network of pipe it has to go through. So huge amount of effort to deliver it. So it is quite a precious resource.
And expensive too in terms of running the water system.
Yeah, expensive to deliver all that. And there's a real cost involved in getting that water to your tap and then taking it away through the sewage network.
I think about 54% of people admit to wasting water at home in their everyday lives. What kind of things can people do to really just conserve water? I
think, look, you can do all the standard stuff like have shorter showers and not have baths. I think that's a given, and people kind of know when they're being indulgent and in that respect. I also think a big one is watering your plants. I really think if you can invest in a water butt, front and back garden potentially, and use that water for plants. And I know we had quite a dry summer this summer, and you could see the usage went up quite considerably, because I know people were having to try and keep their plants going and that kind of stuff. But it's a matter of using rainwater or whatever to do your plants rather than the tap water, which is a precious resource.
I know I had a little semi-nervous breakdown when I first got really tuned into the reality of people wasting water, and my husband would leave the tap running when he was brushing his teeth, and I would be looking at all the water going down the drain and thinking, this is so easy to switch off the tap, brush your teeth and then switch it back on. So the simple things help too, don't they?
It is. And I don't know if that's a uniquely Irish thing, but I grew up with the tap running while I brush my teeth. And it's a habit you have to stop. It's funny, but it is incredible waste of water.
Niall, we have seen a lot of news about climate change and the impact of climate change on our water resources. And we've seen plenty of water conservation orders around the country. Give us a little bit of context for why we are here.
Yeah, so, we're, like I think I was saying before, we're quite a wet country. So we rely on fairly continuous rainfall. A lot of our water is taken from surface water sites. And our groundwater, unlike sort of Central Europe and that, our groundwater is quite shallow and quite small. So when we lose rainfall, that groundwater dries up very quickly, which means the likes of, say, Lough Oul that feeds Mullingar, that's fed from groundwater. It can take 60 days for that to recover. So by the time the water falls from the sky through the groundwater and feeds Lough Oul, there can be a 60-day gap in replenishing. So whereas it might have been raining heavily last week, Lough Oul mightn't recover for another 6 weeks or 8 weeks or so. So there's real challenges in certain areas around the country, and that's why you've seen this year we have not national water conservation orders, but we've had them in certain areas. We had a very actually the whole year last year was quite dry all the way through. So while people might see quite heavy rainfalls recently, it takes us longer to catch up, and we're more used to the soft Irish rain that we used to get years ago. We're now seeing much heavier downpours due to climate change. A lot of those downpours run straight off the land and straight into the rivers and out to sea. So we're not getting the capture that we used to get before. So it's taken us longer to recover. And that is something that we have to be conscious of going forward,
And that's that soft rain thing. We'd rather soft rain that got absorbed by the soil and into the aquifers underground rather than that hard rain that kind of slides off and runs off. Yeah, very good. Yeah. So Uisce Éireann currently has 2,500 staff, and we will become an organisation of 5,000 people by the end of 2026. So enormous growth in terms of the number of people running and working in water services. What kinds of jobs? We've talked a lot today about the engineering and the need for really good engineers within our organisation. But what other kind of roles are there within the company?
Yeah, there's lots of exciting roles. And I think just to explain, the 2,500 are direct Uisce Éireann employees and people who are currently working for us now through local authorities or contractors will transfer into the organisation to create this 5,000 direct employees. So there's definitely really interesting roles. And then on the construction side, there's another 5,000 jobs in contractors. So there's everything from, wastewater specialists, drinking water specialists, there's finance jobs, there's business jobs, there's site engineer jobs, and operator jobs. And I think some of those operator jobs out in, the west of Ireland or northwest or Donegal, really good jobs. We want people to come in, work for us and operate those plants well and good jobs in nice locations, So I think there's some really good, interesting, a really broad section of kind of jobs that we will bring to the country. And I think as you see AI coming in and more sophistication around our technology, the level of those jobs will keep increasing. They become more and more high tech,
So, Niall, you mentioned that, getting good investment in infrastructure, 10.3 billion in capital expenditure in terms of investing to upgrade our infrastructure. How important is it when we're accountable and responsible to the Irish taxpayer, to government, to the Comptroller and Auditor General, for us to manage that money efficiently?
Yeah, it's really important. Like about 20% of our money comes from sort of non-domestic businesses, fee income that way, but the balance of it is from taxpayers, and we really need to demonstrate to the taxpayers and the government and the Exchequer that money invested in Uisce Éireann is well invested and they're getting value for money, and we're delivering services for that money. So really important, but everyone has that mindset in the organisation that we deliver well and we're efficient,
The Joint Oireachtas Committee, you've been in there, you've been in answering questions. What are they focused on in terms of evaluating how efficiently we're spending?
Yeah, and look, it's really interesting to be part of the Joint Oireachtas Committees and the Public Accounts Committees because it's democracy at work and we are spending taxpayers' money. So we go in there with a very open mind on how we address those questions, and they can be very varied and they can be quite challenging too. But actually, I think it's good for the organisation to have that oversight and for politicians to be able to ask us whatever they want, because again, we're spending billions of taxpayers' money. So it's important that we treat it with respect and answer whatever kind of questions come up,
The other kind of key area for us really is the pressure now to deliver on housing. And we have two pretty critical strategic projects in planning at the moment. So the water supply project will go into planning at the end of the year. The Greater Dublin Drainage, which is to support Ringsend. Talk to us a little bit about those two projects. Maybe kick off with the water supply project and how important that is.
Yeah, so the water supply, and I talked about climate change and how our rainfall is changing, but we will not have the opportunity to build new reservoirs. There isn't the land banks, there isn't the appetite, and environmentally they're very destructive. You couldn't build another Pula Fuca today, But the Shannon is a giant, slow-moving reservoir. Really, it's one of the biggest resources that the country has. We'll be tapping into that. So really, the impact on the Shannon itself is tiny, but the impact on Dublin is going to be huge. I mean, really. We rely very heavily on the Liffey. We're taking, 40% of the water from the Liffey. 85% of the water in Dublin is provided by the Liffey, and it's actually I think it's the 14th biggest river in the country. So it's relatively small compared to some other rivers. So heavy reliance on the Liffey, but also a very heavy reliance on the two existing water treatment plants, Leixlip and Ballymore Uisce. So we've no backup. Other cities have additional resources, but also additional plants. So having the water supply, the treatment plant in Partine, and then the water pumped up to Dublin will be a game changer for reliability of water, for growth, for new housing, and for investment in the country as well. So it's vital for the city to have that additional supply.
And also in the future, that supply would enable towns and counties on the route to benefit from that. So it's not just about Dublin.
Yeah, so it's not just the route. So the likes of Mullingar, where I just talked about Lough Oul and the challenges with that lake, we will eventually tap off that pipe and supply Mullingar with that pipe. So a lot of towns, I think about a third of the water will be distributed to towns in the Midlands. But the other thing it will allow us to do that water supplies that are currently feeding the GDA, the Greater Dublin area, we will be able to turn those around and head them north or south. So Wexford and Wicklow will get water supply from and allow them to grow from existing supplies that are currently feeding Dublin. So it will allow us to spread the water around a lot better. So this project will touch probably 50% of the population of the country. It's not a Dublin-centric project that it does sometimes the reputation there,
And where are we at in the process with that in terms of approval and obviously getting to get it built?
So we hit a big milestone recently. We went out with the landowner packages, and this is the compensation landowners would get for us to build the pipe across your site. We'll take a 50-metre section across your site while we build, and then we ask you not to build anything on a 20-metre section after. So it is quite disruptive, but we've gone out with these compensation packages, and they've been reasonably well received, and the IFA and ICMSA have endorsed them. So that's a big milestone. And an important milestone along the way to the planning application, which we expect to go in by the end of the year. So we're working very hard to get the communities along the route to buy in, not to buy in, but to understand the project and to understand that this is a benefit for the entire country.
On the wastewater side, then obviously we have Ringsend, which has taken about 40% of the country's waste at the moment and is reaching its compliance stand level in terms of that. We need Greater Dublin Drainage, which is the new option to help us with managing wastewater. Where are we at in that project?
Yeah, so on the Greater Dublin Drainage project, we designed the whole of the northwest network in Dublin to be facilitated by this new treatment plant, which is state of the art and a necessary project. Again, we don't generate the waste. We gather other people's waste and we treat it. So this is necessary for us to do. That project has been in design for, I would say, 20 years probably, and we went for planning in 2018. And one of my frustrations, we just opened a treatment plant down in Arklow, which got permission in 2019, the same year that we got permission for the GDD project. The Arklow project didn't have a judicial review. We've built that project. It's now delivering for the people of Arklow. It's treating water from the Avoca River. That water, the sewage used to go straight out into the river and out to sea. So now that town is able to grow and deliver, and the sewage has been treated properly. The same year that in 2019 GDD got judicially challenged, it's been stuck in the court since. It's been stuck in the courts and on Bord Pleanála. We finally got planning permission again this year, and now it's been challenged again. So I guess, the two plants, very similar design, do the same thing. So my frustration is one is held up by the process and the other one isn't. There's no logic to that and there's no sense behind it. So, these are projects that deliver for the environment. Like, we're the environmentalists. We have people objecting on environmental grounds, but really a lot of the stuff it doesn't add up. And these are projects that are needed. If you want a population of 1.5 million in Dublin, you need this kind of infrastructure.
They're very, very critical projects, and it's great to see, I guess, some progress and momentum now in terms of moving them on, even though we're still a little bit away from actually having them on the ground and ready. But I guess that's critical for us, Niall, is to keep finding solutions to these infrastructure problems and putting in place plans to get us to enable an economic growth and housing.
Yeah. And I think one of the frustrations for us is we know the engineering solutions. Like, what we build is relatively straightforward, the water treatment plants, how the chemicals work, and there is innovation every so often, but they're not overly complicated. That's why, we know what we're doing. We can build these plants well and we can deliver well. I would say it's the planning and the judicial review process is probably holding us back, because not only do we have those processes, we probably spend an extra year or so developing those projects so they can get through the planning system and get through the courts, which is nearly the more difficult challenge. We dot every I and cross every T twice, because we know we might get challenged on the most minor sort of issue in the documentation thing, but they can get held up by the courts. And I think in that sense, the greater good is being lost. The common good is not being recognised. These projects are vital for the country, and people won't, our children won't get houses unless we deliver these projects.
Niall, we've talked about the water supply project and how critical that is for a sustainable supply of water in the future for Ireland. What about leakage? People often say, just fix the leaks.
Yeah. It is a huge challenge, and I get the frustration. When we started off, 50% of the water was in the country was leaking out of the pipes. We're now down to about 34% nationally, and we are working very hard. We're spending, we will spend billions over the next 5 years to get those leakage rates down through repairs and replacements. But it's a real challenge, and there's a certain level of background leakage that we will probably never get below. But we are very focused on leakage. But again, if I go back to Dublin, leakage only gets us so far and will only get us so far, but we're still taking the same water from the Liffey. So it doesn't take the risk of the Liffey being the main supply away. So we really need that additional source and additional pipe so that we have that extra resilience. So leakage is not the solution to everything.
And I guess with there's so much in the leakage story, we'll definitely come back to it in a further podcast episode. It's really fascinating in terms of the size, the scale, the complexity. But I'm also curious about safety. I know it's a very critical Uisce Éireann value in terms of keeping people safe on sites. And how important is that to us as an organisation?
Yeah, it's really important. We send about 9,000 people to work every day. So it's, that's a lot of people going out in, not hazardous, but they can be tricky conditions. And some of them are hazardous, but we manage those hazards, So we have a lot of people doing work that is unusual and out of the ordinary. You're isolating pipes, you're isolating electrical equipment, and you got to keep people safe. So all the time, those 9,000 people, we have to manage their work surroundings and make sure that the systems and the knowledge and the training we give them, allows them to do their work safely.
Talk to me about some of the hazards, in terms of actually on a big construction site. So for your day-to-day workers, like, what do they need to be doing to ensure we keep people safe on sites?
So look, a big construction site has every hazard, as falling, objects falling from height yourself, electrical hazards, high pressures. So like every construction site, it has a lot of hazards. So, the initial part is getting the induction training, making sure that the staff understand the local conditions and what hazards there are. And then it's on the job, training and making sure that one of the big messages I give is that we don't want you to do anything out of the ordinary. My experience of when I've interviewed people after accidents and talked to them about what happened, they kind of knew that something wasn't right before the accident happened. And that's a real instinct that we all have. But it's always being aware of your surroundings. And if you're not comfortable with something, if you think it's not right, that you stop the work, talk to your supervisor or your manager and reassess the situation. It's a really strong message we give to all of our staff. And to be able to stop the work is a real thing, because we often, I think on construction sites over the years, even I've walked past something kind of going, God, I don't know if I do it that way, but you just kind of ignore it. And we're trying to change that attitude as people don't walk past hazardous situations, that they'll stop and think,
I also am, curious as well, like this transfers into the office. So I know when I first joined Uisce Éireann, people would be stopping me on the stairs if I had my phone in my hand or my laptop. If I was on the phone, going downstairs, that people were very good at stopping you going, that's not a safe thing to do. And it takes a bit of courage for staff to call out to each other, maybe where they see these things and speaking up about it.
Yeah.
Do you find we're encouraging that?
No, definitely. And it's something that as managers and senior executives, we need to lead by example. So, and I do it myself the odd time when you subconsciously take out your phone to check something as you're going down the stairs, and you shouldn't, because you should be holding onto the handrail. You're distracted by the steps and all that kind of stuff. I do remember on when I was with another company, you're supposed to wear a high vis jacket, and I didn't. I kept forgetting to put it on in the car, and I got caught one day again, and I told the guy to give me a sort of a first warning. We had a 2 strikes and you're out kind of thing, So this poor safety officer had to come up to the CEO and give him his safety. He was shaking as he filled in the card. But I said to him, look, I should be treated the same way as everybody else. And so I got my first warning, and I wore my jacket from then on. But that's the kind of attitude we have to have.
I think even when I'm away and I'm not on holidays, I'm looking at sites and people not having harnesses on, my heart skips a beat a little bit, or people working with equipment and not having safety glasses. I think our culture is very focused on making sure that we're...
Yes, right. And I came from that international, where we tried to bring standards up, but to some of the horror stories I saw while I was traveling just heightens your sense of safety and what can go wrong. So it's very key that we keep people safe, and complacency is the killer on safety.
Let's move on now to, I think, your proudest moment in Uisce Éireann since you joined the business.
I don't know whether it's an actual moment, but I used to tell a story of when I joined first. I got in a taxi with some of the other staff members. We were going up to Kildare Street to meet some minister. I can't remember what it was, but we all got in the taxi, and the taxi driver says, "Oh, where do you all work?" And there was a pause, like a 2 second, or felt like 2 seconds, but there was a pause where no one would say where they worked. And I was kind of going, "Oh, that's I've never had that before," So people were, when I went around the offices to visit people, I couldn't find a lot of the offices because the signage was down, because people didn't want people to know they were there. So this was all a legacy from the water charges. And when I joined, people didn't want to say they worked for Irish Water, Uisce Éireann. Now people practically shout it from the rooftops, I think. You know what I mean? They love coming in here. We're attracting graduates at job fairs where people wouldn't come to our stands before, and all that kind of stuff. So that's really, that change, that confidence we have in our ability to deliver has been one of the biggest, one of the things I'm not proud of, because it's not all me, but definitely I think it's something that has changed in the organisation over the few years I've been here.
10 years from now, looking back, what will Uisce Éireann have achieved if it's to be successful?
I think we've got to get the basics right. So we've got to get, we're at about 99.7 on the water quality. We need to get 100% all around the country. I'd love to eliminate boil water notices completely. And then, things like no raw sewage going into the seas or the rivers, and stormwater overflows reduced as much as possible. They're the basics. But I also think as we change as an organisation, people are looking at what we're doing, and we are achieving, we're achieving one of the biggest public sector transformations in the state, and it's been done quietly and well, and people are getting on with it. So when we get to that legacy, that people would look to us and say, well, how did Uisce Éireann do that? They seem to have done a good job. Let's look at how they managed that process. And we have people coming in from New Zealand and Korea looking at how we're managing that change from a sort of a regional municipality delivery of water services to a national organisation. So a lot of people looking at what we're doing. So a great legacy would be for people to be saying, how did Uisce Éireann approach that? How did they deliver it?
Niall, that sounds like a really exciting journey that Uisce Éireann is on. Thank you for taking the time to share that with us today. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks, Orla. It's great to be here.
And that's it for the first episode of Uisce Matters. See you next time.